Halfway through Love Me Tender, Elvis lifted his hand and stopped the band. The arena froze. 15,000 fans sat in silence as the king stepped down from the spotlight. He walked toward the front row, where a child with an oxygen tube clutched. A handmade sign. Stories like this remind us why Elvis wasn't just a performer. He was a presence. If you believe kindness on stage can change lives, stay with us. This moment will leave you breathless. The house lights dropped, and the arena shifted into darkness. A low hum from the amplifiers filled the air, like electricity waiting to break loose. The year was the mid-1970s, St. Louis. A sold-out show, 15,000 fans clutching programs, cameras, and scarves leaned forward in their seats. The temperature inside rose with the press of bodies, the smell of hairspray and popcorn hanging thick. Then the spotlight snapped on. Dust motes swirled in the beam, and there he was, Elvis Presley, the king. White jumpsuit catching the light. Rhinestones sparkling like stars against black velvet curtains. The roar that followed shook the rafters. Ushers had to steady the rails as people surged toward the front. The band launched into the opening chords of Love Me Tender. That simple, aching melody spilled across the arena. Fans screamed, then softened into silence, listening. Some swayed, some cried. Couples held hands, mothers clutched daughters. It wasn't just music. It was memory being sung out loud. Halfway through the second verse, Elvis lifted one hand, a crisp, deliberate gesture. The band cut off instantly, leaving only the hiss of the sound system. The song evaporated mid-line. The crowd froze. Thousands of eyes blinked toward the stage, confused. Elvis didn't speak. He didn't smile. He simply stepped forward, closer to the edge of the stage. His boots clicked against the wood, echoing under the sudden silence. The only sound was a nervous cough from the balcony. Fans exchanged whispers. Had he forgotten the words? Was he ill? Some stood to see better. A man near the front said later, it felt like the air itself stopped moving. Elvis shielded his eyes against the spotlight and peered into the crowd. His gaze locked on something or someone. In the front row, he started walking, one careful step at a time. Security shifted, camera bulbs popped. The tension was unbearable. And here's the thing, Elvis Presley didn't miss notes. He didn't miss beats. When he stopped, there had to be a reason. 15,000 people leaned forward at once, holding their breath, waiting to see what the king had seen. What could possibly make Elvis Presley stop Love Me Tender mid-song at the height of his show? Elvis stepped closer to the edge of the stage. The spotlight followed, dragging a white circle across the floorboards. Security men at the foot of the platform stiffened. Some shifted to block, others glanced at each other, unsure. This wasn't in the plan. Then the crowd saw what he had seen. A boy in the front row, no older than 7. Thin shoulders lost inside a too large jacket. A hospital wristband clinging loose on his wrist. Plastic tubing curled along his cheek, catching the light before disappearing into a small oxygen tank beside his chair. In both hands, the boy clutched a cardboard sign, wobbly letters drawn in thick black marker. Elvis, sing for me. The arena fell even quieter. The rustle of programs stopped. Someone in the balcony whispered, and the sound carried like thunder in the silence. Elvis froze at the rail, staring at the boy. He leaned down slightly, hands on his knees, and tilted his head as if trying to read every word of that shaky sign. Fans nearby later said they saw his face change. The entertainer's grin faded into something softer, something personal. A rough cough rattled the boy's chest. His mother adjusted the oxygen line with trembling fingers. She tried to smile, but tears slid down her cheeks. People in the rows behind her pressed hands to their mouths. Elvis lowered himself, one knee bent against the wooden stage, his jeweled jumpsuit glinting in the spotlight. He reached out an open palm toward the boy. The child reached back, small hand, pale and shaking. Their fingers brushed. The ushers stopped moving. Even the security men, trained to stay stone-faced, stood frozen in place. 15,000 people witnessed something they'd never forget. The king of rock and roll kneeling in silence before a sick child. But Elvis wasn't finished. He leaned closer, lips moving. Witnesses recall he whispered something only the boy could hear. A smile flickered across the child's face, brief but bright. And then the open question hung in the air. Would Elvis stand, brush it off, and return to the stage lights? Or would he break the rules of show business and stay here in front of one boy, with 15,000 people waiting in stunned silence? In that moment, the entire arena wondered, would Elvis return to the stage or stay with the boy? The arena was silent, every breath drawn tight as Elvis lowered himself fully onto one knee. The spotlight burned against his rhinestone suit, scattering pinpoints of light onto the first few rows. Sweat traced down his temple, catching in the glare. The boy's eyes widened as Elvis leaned, close enough that the crowd could see their faces almost touch. The king's voice, low and steady, carried through the mic clipped to his chest. "Hey there, little man. Some witnesses claim," he said. The boy lifted his trembling lips, whispered something back. Others recall it clearly. "Don't stop." Singing. A shiver ran through the room. People in the balcony leaned forward, straining to catch every sound. In the upper levels, you could hear sniffles ripple like an echo. Elvis didn't climb back up to the stage. Instead, still crouched at the edge, he gave a subtle nod to the band. The musicians looked at each other, confused. Then, gently, the guitarist struck a single, soft chord, and Elvis began to sing. Not to the rafters, not to the sea of thousands. He sang one stanza of "Love Me Tender" to that boy, right there, kneeling. His voice softened, stripped of the swagger and showmanship, but carried through the speakers like a prayer. A woman in the back row later said, it felt like church. Another said she saw a security guard, tough as nails, wipe his eye with his sleeve. Cameras flashed, freezing the moment in bright bursts. Each shutter sounded like a heartbeat. The boy's mother covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. The scarf around Elvis's neck slipped forward, brushing the child's hand as he sang. Elvis didn't break eye contact. The boy's lips moved. With the words, though his breath came shallow through the oxygen line. For those few lines, time collapsed. It wasn't a performance anymore. It was communion. Then came the twist. Instead of standing and returning to the spotlight, Elvis let the final note hang in the air, reverberating through the speakers. He placed his hand gently on the boy's shoulder. Witnesses recall the child clutching tighter, refusing to let go. The audience, holding back, finally broke. Applause thundered. Some screamed his name. Others sobbed openly, holding strangers around them. But Elvis stayed kneeling, his head bowed slightly, as if in prayer, before he finally rose. He touched the boy's hair once more, then turned back toward the stage. The light followed him, dragging the crowd's eyes away. though many couldn't stop staring at the boy. And here's the part no one saw coming. Elvis hadn't finished with him yet. What he did next would turn an intimate moment into a gesture that shook 15,000 people to their core. What would Elvis do after finishing that verse? Something that would make history echo long after the last note faded. The final note of "Love Me Tender" still vibrated in the rafters when Elvis straightened. His breathing was heavy, the spotlight glinting off the jewels stitched into his collar. The boy's small hand slipped reluctantly from his, but Elvis wasn't. Finished, the crowd erupted in applause, a wall of sound that rattled the arena's steel beams. People clapped, screamed, whistled, but Elvis silenced them again with one raised palm. The band froze. The lights held steady. Everyone waited. He reached for the scarf around his neck, damp with sweat from the heat of the stage. Slowly, deliberately, Elvis unwrapped it and held it in his hand. The gesture alone sent another wave of noise rippling through the fans. Some had waited entire careers just to catch a tossed scarf, but this one wasn't going into the air. Elvis leaned down and draped it gently over the boy's shoulders. The fabric slid across the child's frail frame, hanging like a royal banner. The boy clutched it with both hands, knuckles white. His mother gasped and covered her face, sobs breaking through her trembling fingers. The crowd went wild. The sound was deafening, but in the front row it was intimate. Elvis pressed a finger softly against the boy's chest, just once, as if to say, "This is yours." Then he straightened and turned to face the arena. Tonight, witnesses recall him saying into the mic, "This song belongs to him." The reaction was instant. Fans leaped to their feet, the sound of chairs banging back against concrete echoing like thunder. A standing ovation swept the arena in a rolling wave. Ushers clapped. Security guards exchanged glances. Their professional cool cracked wide open. People began crying openly. A woman in section 104 fainted. An elderly man pressed his hand over his heart. In the press box, reporters stopped scribbling and just stared. Elvis gave one small nod to the band. The guitarist struck a chord, and the show continued, but the energy had changed. Every lyric that followed felt heavier, sharper, like it carried more weight. Each time Elvis glanced toward the boy, fans screamed louder. Every scarf he tossed after that moment was a symbol, not just a souvenir. Still, the focus always returned to that child in the front row. Some fans craned necks, desperate to see his face again. Others whispered to each other, already retelling the story as if history had happened before their eyes. As the concert pressed on, a thought lingered in the air. Was that it? Would the memory end with a scarf, a stanza, and a bow? Or was there something more to come, hidden beyond the lights and music? Backstage, after the encore, the whispers began. Crew members said Elvis had asked about the boy. Some recall he ordered someone to take down the family's information. Others say they saw him holding the child's sign, folded carefully, as he walked off stage. The fans went home that night, stunned, telling anyone who would listen about the pause, the scarf, the kneeling. But what none of them knew was that the most powerful part of the story hadn't even happened yet. Because days later, long after the lights dimmed and the arena emptied, something arrived at the boy's doorstep that would leave his family speechless. The concert ended in roaring applause. Fans filed out of the St. Louis arena, buzzing, voices echoing with the same story. Elvis Presley had stopped "Love Me Tender" mid-song, knelt in front of a child, and given him his scarf. People swore it was the most human thing they'd ever seen from a star of his size. But for the boy's family, the story wasn't finished. According to those close to them, the following week brought an unexpected knock at their door. A courier stood there, holding a package with no return label. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small guitar, sized for a child, and a folded envelope. The mother opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note. Witnesses recalled the exact words, "You'll always have a seat in the front row, Elvis." Alongside the note were 2 concert tickets, marked lifetime access. The family stared in silence, unable to process what they were holding. The boy reached for the guitar, laying it across his lap. His hands were weak, but he strummed a few uneven chords. His smile, faint and fleeting, filled the room. News of the gesture didn't spread immediately. There were no headlines, no press releases. It lived mostly in whispers, passed between family, friends, and the fans who'd been there that night. But among those who knew, it became legend. Elvis had not only given a moment on stage, he had given something lasting, personal and private. The guitar, according to the family, never left the boy's side. It rested by his bed, leaned carefully against the nightstand. When he was too weak to play, he traced his fingers along its strings. His mother later said that guitar made him feel seen, not sick, just a kid with a gift. Elvis, by then, was at the height of his fame. Night after night, new shows, new cities, new seas of screaming fans. But the memory of that child lingered. Crew members said he spoke about it backstage, reflecting quietly in moments when the cameras were gone. For the fans who had been in St. Louis, the story never faded. Many said the concert changed them, not because of the songs, but because of the silence. "I went to hear him sing," one fan recalled, "but what I remember most is how he stopped, and what he gave." The boy's life was short. According to reports, he passed not long after, but the memory of that night carried through his family for decades. The guitar remained, and the note was preserved in a frame. And here lies the share trigger twist. The act itself was never meant for cameras, for press, or for fame. It was meant for one child, one family, one night that became eternal. Elvis Presley, in the middle of his kingdom, surrounded by 15,000 worshippers, had chosen to step down, kneel, and give everything to someone who could give nothing back. For many, that was Elvis at his most powerful, not in the songs, not in the records, but in the kindness he showed when no one expected it. Decades later, fans still speak of it as one of the greatest unscripted moments of his career. Music historians note that these personal gestures, scarves, gifts, sudden breaks in performance, became part of his legend, cementing him not just as an icon, but as a man who carried empathy into the spotlight. Sometimes, the most unforgettable performances are the ones that never make it to the record. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes kindness can stop a room. What do you think? Was this Elvis's most powerful performance, or his most powerful act of love? Tell us in the comments.